Good morning, district team. Dan Skiro coming to you from my home once again. We're in week 3 of the stay-at-home order here in Minnesota. And so you're in a different room than you've been in the last video. The last video we shot from our living room. You got a chance to see some of my wife's art. This video we are shooting from the piano room. And this room I've chosen on purpose. You can't see the piano. It's just on the other side of the lamp there, but this is a room in which young learners come to be taught by my wife on how to play the piano more effectively. And in any given day, there's a number of young people that come through here, and we have melodious music that comes out of this room, and some days not so melodious. That's the nature of being a learner. There's a lot of mistakes that are made on the path to excellence. And so this room represents something to me that I think it's part of something that we're all in. We are all in the piano room in these days. We are all learners. We are not necessarily learning music, but we're in a new phase of learning. Many of us are being stretched in ways that we've never been stretched before. And for every learner, there's a variety of responses to learning. There's some of us who, when we've been pushed out of our comfort zone and we're learning something new, that excites us, and we love the newness of it, and we pursue it with vigor. There's, on the far spectrum, those of us who approach learning new things as threatening and difficult, and it puts us in a position where we might be perceived as not effective, and it creates all kinds of disaster in our spirit. For most of us, we fall in the spectrum somewhere between those two extremes of learners on a journey. I'm intimately aware that in these days, all of us are coming into a part of the learning journey that every learner experiences, whether you're the I love it, this is amazing, I'm being pushed out of my comfort zone, or you're on the other spectrum where I hate this, it's new, I feel insecure. All of us have a similar experience, no matter where you are on that spectrum, and that is that within a very short period of entering the learning journey, the newness begins to wear off. And I want to suggest that if you're not there yet, you're going to be there soon, that all of us in this new season of doing church, we're far enough in now that the newness has begun to wear off. And those of you who were excited by being stretched and pushed, you're realizing there's some drudgery and there's some, do I have to shoot another video? Some of you are thinking that. And so, irregardless of where you are on the spectrum and how you approach learning, all of us experience the drudgery phase, the moment when we realize this is just work and I have to press through. And the truth about learning is that pressing through the drudgery phase is critical to our ability to wrap our arms around the learning that we have attempted and to apply it in a way that it changes our lives. And you're in the middle of that right this moment. I want to take just a few minutes here to speak to you about that phase of learning because, again, if you're not in it, you're headed into it. The drudgery phase is upon you. And there are some key things that will be helpful to you on this journey. I've recently been studying the passage found in 1 Kings chapter 18 and 19, studying it again. Not too long ago, I taught a leadership training on the 5 dangers of leadership in the kingdom out of that passage. And I don't have time to share that with you now, but maybe we'll do it another time. At the tail end of that story is some things that apply to all of us and are really helpful to us in the drudgery phase of whatever we're doing, whether it be something good or something challenging. There's a drudgery phase. Come with me, if you have a Bible, turn to 1 Kings chapter 19. And in that passage, we find our friend Elijah, who was the main character in this story in chapter 18 and chapter 19. We find him on the back end of a really exciting phase in his ministry journey. Good things have been happening. God has been glorified. The enemy has been pushed back, and the kingdom has been advanced. But here we find him now being pursued by somebody who was unhappy with what happened in the advance of the kingdom. and he is tired. He had the experience at Mount Carmel, and then subsequently, very quickly, God used him to end the drought in the country. But in this passage, we find him somewhat discouraged. In chapter 19, he leaves a friend of his and he travels a day away. And the passage I want us to focus on today is found right there. He ends up underneath a broom bush, or a broom tree, they call it. It's a smallish tree, about 6-7 feet high, and has a canopy that's anywhere from 6 to 10, 12 feet wide, and it forms a pretty good shade tree. In that part of the country, and that part of the world, they were common. And he finds himself under one of these after a successful season of ministry and then some persecution, and he's tired. He's hurting emotionally and physically and mentally. He's just worn out. And the expression of that is found as he comes to God and he says, God, I've had enough. I've had enough. Take my life. My life is no better than my ancestors. You find three very interesting things there. I've reached my limit. I want to give up. Take my life. And my life has meant nothing. I don't know if you've ever been in that spot where you had one or all three of those emotions. If you've had all three simultaneously, it's a very challenging moment in your life as a leader. I'm done. I'm tired. I don't even want to live anymore. And I don't think my life is making any difference. That's a tough place to be. Now, we would expect in this story that God would show up miraculously and he would meet all of Elijah's needs, and that happens subsequently, but it's not the first thing that happens. And I think that's an interesting moment for us to realize in Scripture. I love the layers of life and leadership and theology that we see in Scripture. The first thing that happens for our friend Elijah, after expressing himself, is that he falls asleep. What does that tell us? Elijah was incredibly tired. Incredibly tired. And just a couple of words later in that passage, an angel wakes him up, and we might expect something great to happen there in that moment, an epiphany, but the angel feeds him. Interesting. And then Elijah goes back to sleep. A few words later, the angel wakes him again. We expect maybe words of wisdom. No, he gets fed again. And then the angel says, there's a journey in front of you. I want us to pause right here and recognize something very important. In the journey of growth, in the journey of ministry, in these drudgery phases when we want to quit and discouragement begins to settle into our spirit, sometimes we need to pay attention to the simple things. And that's the first thing I want you to jot down if you're jotting down notes, or something that I want you to remember, is that in moments of discouragement, in the grind phase of learning, in the grind phase of ministry, sometimes it's the simple things that we need to do. What do I mean by simple things? Well, it's not rocket science. I mean, get your sleep. Make sure you sleep well. Make sure you eat well. Make sure that you hydrate. That's in this passage. And make sure you get some exercise. That's also in this passage, by the way. Sometimes the simple things are the things that you need to do when you're in a drudgery phase and your spirit is discouraged and your body is tired and your mind is exhausted. You simply need to do the simple things. So some of you in this season where everything's been thrown up in the air and you're doing more video than you've ever done, you're doing church ministry different than you've ever done, and you're on the phone constantly, and you're having another Zoom meeting. I don't know if you're having that experience, but there are days for me that I'm spending 10 hours on a Zoom meeting or a series of Zoom meetings. That tires us all out. So if that's the case for you, it might mean that you just need to do some of the simple things. So I'll remind you of that. Eat, sleep, drink, get your exercise. Make sure that those are being done. My children have gotten tired over the years of me saying that to them, but it's something I'll say to them their entire life. When they are discouraged and they call me or they sit down to talk with me, one of the first things I ask them is, have you done the simple things? They now know what I mean when I say that. Have you eaten well? Have you eaten good food instead of junk food? Have you slept? Have you hydrated with water? And are you getting some exercise? I'll throw that into your thinking for what it's worth. It's oddly scriptural. I'm always amazed at the things I discover in Scripture, and I know that that's true. Simple things sometimes are the solution. That wasn't everything that Elijah needed, though. In the grind phase of his life and ministry, he needed to take a journey of discovery. And so the angel tells him to go, and he takes a journey of 40 days. I don't know if that's significant or not as I think about life and leadership development. Maybe I'll flesh that 40-day issue out later. But let's skip over that. He took a journey, and several important things happened. In the grind phase of Elijah's ministry, and oddly enough, it was the twilight years of his ministry, Elijah had lost several important things. He had lost hope. He had lost a sense of purpose. And he was convinced that he was alone. And those were the three issues that God needed to deal with in his life when he came to that cave after a journey. And so the first thing that God asks him is, why are you here? And we observe something very interesting. We observe a lament from Elijah. And sometimes you just need to verbalize what you're feeling and thinking. And I think that's an important part of the journey, is that sometimes you need a friend, or you need to say it to God, or you need to journal it, but you just need to let the lament come out of your spirit in word or in writing. That's an interesting observation. What God does with that lament is that he reintroduces Elijah to himself. He shows Elijah what God is like and how God operates and how he interacts. And in that moment, Elijah rediscovers hope. God is alive. I know he's alive. And suddenly my spirit is filled with hope again. Maybe in this season, you need to reacquaint yourself with the God of hope. You need to take a journey. I don't know what that looks like for you, if that's getting away, or it might be something as simple as taking a few moments. But reacquainting yourself with the God of hope. Who is he? What's he about? Does he speak? That's important. Especially in the drudgery phase of something new like we're attempting here in church life. The second thing that God addresses in the life of Elijah is that he reorients him to the purpose that he has for him. In this case, there are two kings that need to be anointed, and there's a successor for Elijah that needs to be anointed. And God makes that clear and says, here's your task, here's your purpose. For many of us in the drudgery phase, we lose our ability to focus. In fact, we lose our view of our purpose. When things get tossed up in the air and we're on our third or fourth video of the week, the purpose gets a little dim. Why are we doing this? Friends, I want to reacquaint you and encourage you to reacquaint yourselves with the purpose. Why are we doing this? Every man, woman, and child needs to know that the gospel of Jesus is true and can transform their life. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing the videos. That's why we're changing the way we do ministry and rethinking it, because that is still the purpose. Friends, take time to reacquaint yourself with the brokenness of the world and the purpose of God for you in the world. I know of no better antidote to discouragement and the grind phase of ministry than those things: the ability to lament, the ability to rediscover who God is, and the ability to realign with purpose. The last thing I want to mention to you is something that's so important, especially in this season of what we're going through. Elijah felt completely alone. We see that in his lament. I am the only one. He says that twice. Do you feel that way? Have you felt that way? Is loneliness creeping into your spirit and your soul in these days as we're being sequestered from almost everybody? Loneliness is a factor in leadership, and in these days it's especially a factor for you as a leader, and you need to address that in your spirit. You need to know that you're not alone, both in human relationships, but more in the fact that God is doing something bigger and there's other people involved in it. And God reminds Elijah that unbeknownst to him, there were 7,000 other people who were aligned with the mission of God and moving forward, and Elijah was not alone. He was not the only one. Friends, you are not alone. I want to remind you of that today, that there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who are aligned around the same purposes that you have, and you are not alone in the mission that God has given you. God is with you, and others are walking this path with you. Elijah needed to know that he could be heard, that his lament could be heard. Elijah needed to know that there was hope, that God was still who he said he was. Elijah needed to know that there was still a purpose for all of this. And Elijah needed to know that he was not alone. I don't know if any of those ring true in your spirit, but if you're in the drudgery phase of this journey that we're taking, and it's just work to make one more phone call, to write one more email, to make one more video, I want to remind you that there's a purpose behind all of it. You're not alone. God is still who he says he is. And my dear friends, do not forget to do the simple things, because sometimes that's exactly what you need. I pray for you constantly. May God bless you. May he fill you with his presence. May you sense him close in that quiet voice. And may he fill you with purpose for these days, even the challenging days. God bless.